Hey guys, welcome to Storytime with Jester. Tonight I'll be continuing the saga of Andor and his companions. We will pick up where we left off last week at chapter 85. Andor had hoped Xavier would be able to accompany him on the arduous task that was set before him. He hadn't heard anything from Xavier for quite a while, and he hadn't responded to any of Andor's summons. Andor tasked a group that Hawkeye had allied with, calling themselves the Defenders, to search for Xavier at his tower in Marladron. They were able to locate him with Devon's help, but the man they brought back to Andor, bound and gagged, was a far cry from the friend and wizard he once knew. Some evil had managed to overtake Xavier. One, Andor, with all the power of St. Columba, was unable to exercise. So when the time had come for Andor to make the long journey south to the great southern swamp, he was forced to leave Xavier a virtual prisoner in Sanctuary. Andor was disheartened, not only for the condition of his friend, but he had been counting on Xavier's magic if things went badly. He was not sure of what powers this hierarch possessed, nor of what her disposition toward him would be, but he would have felt a lot better had Xavier been there with him. As it was, Jovan agreed to join him and, at the very least, be a guide through the swamp if necessary. Given the location of the swamp, they decided the best course of action was to ride there on their hippogriffs, Truth and Nightwind. It took several weeks to get to the swamp, and when it finally came into view, they landed and began walking, their mounts by their side. The swamp, from their view before they landed, stretched as far and wide as their eyes could see. As they waded through the knee-high brown waters teeming with all manner of reptiles and insects, Andor decided it would be best if they took to the sky again. Our chances of finding this hierarch will be much quicker and safer if we search from the air, he said. Agreed, Jovan said as he slung a 4-foot-long water moccasin from his longsword. Just as they mounted Truth and Nightwind and became airborne again, 2 huge crocodiles could be seen emerging from the waters where they just were. As they ventured further over the swamp, they could see just how vast this area was and the wisdom of Andor's decision. Although their vantage from the air was broader than on land, their search area covered some 30,000 square miles. This could take a while, Andor said, more to himself than to Jovan, for he would have had to yell across the wind for his friend to hear him. After several hours of searching, it dawned on Andor that they would have no safe place to rest or sleep if they continued on their mounts. Andor motioned for Jovan to land. When they were both on the ground again, he informed Jovan of his concerns. Jovan agreed, so he unrolled his carpet of flying and sent their mounts away. They stepped on the carpet, and Jovan commanded it to fly. Andor, not used to this sort of travel, sat down. When we need to rest, I will have the carpet hover in place, Jovan assured. Where did you get this? Andor asked, in awe of the carpet. He moved his hand across the fabric, marveling at the workmanship. As his hand came to a golden pin stuck in the carpet, Jovan suddenly warned, Don't touch that! Andor recoiled as if he had been bitten by a snake. It must not be removed, Jovan added. Within the pin lies the magic of the carpet. On they searched, days turning into weeks. They searched by day, taking turns sleeping at night. Andor created food and fresh water daily to sustain them. What do you know of this hierarch we seek? Jovan asked. The elder hierarch said that she was once one of the 8 that went into self-banishment, that she, for some reason he did not reveal, returned, but was not the same as when she left. She barely resembles a druid anymore, and he fears she no longer cares for that which she was entrusted to protect. Why do you need to find her? Did you not get all of your questions answered through the pool of time? Not all. There is one thing yet that has eluded me. The sun was setting on yet another day on Andor's quest for answers. They found a spot where the carpet could hover, high enough to avoid creatures from the swamp, low enough to avoid detection from those that fly, such as dragons. As dusk turned into night, Jovan spotted an odd radiance coming from the east. It had an unearthly purple hue, faint, but there nonetheless. "What do you make of that?" he said, directing Andor's attention to the strange lighting. "Have you ever seen anything like it before?" Andor stared at the illumination while pondering the possibilities. Finally, he said, "Can you safely fly this thing at night?" "At a turtle's pace, yes." "Then let us investigate this strange sight. I have a feeling we may have located the Hierarch." The pair edged along ever so cautiously, not wanting to disturb what was causing the weird lighting, but also not wanting to strike something that may be jutting up out of the swamp, causing them to fall off of the carpet and into the murky waters below. At the pace they were moving, it took them nearly an hour to reach the source of the purple glow. Situated in a small clearing was a tiny hut, resembling that of his druid friend Lockru. It was made of logs and had a thatched roof, but what set it apart from Lockru's was the fact that it appeared to be supported in the air, away from the hazards of the swamp, by stilts. Surrounding it was a circle of poles which had some sort of device affixed at the top of each, from which a purplish light emanated, causing the space between them and the hut to glow with the radiance Jovan and Andor had been tracking. Jovan stopped the carpet from advancing any further and caused it to hover in place just outside the circle of poles. "Well," Andor said, "it sort of looks like a druid's grove. These poles could be a druid circle, I suppose." "Yes, but have you noticed the absence of sound here?" Jovan replied, looking around. "It's as if all wildlife has ceased to exist." Andor pondered the situation for several minutes before Jovan broke the silence by asking, "What do you wish to do?" "I believe we should wait right here until morning," Andor replied. "See what the light of day reveals." Jovan had taken the first watch, so when dawn broke, Andor was the first to see their surroundings for what they were. "Jovan, wake up," Andor said as he lightly shook his friend. As Jovan started to rouse, Andor continued, "Remember that fanged golem in the Lich's Tower?" Before Jovan could even respond, Andor went on, "Well, those poles that were glowing last night." Andor didn't finish the sentence, but his message was heard loud and clear as Jovan sat upright and scanned the poles for himself. "Illamora, protect us." He sat up in whispered prayer to the elven goddess. "That's not all," Andor continued. "Those stilts supporting the hut." He let that sentence hang there, causing Jovan to direct his gaze at the hut. It was no longer being held aloft. Where last night it was some 20 feet in the air, today it rested firmly on the ground. "Remember what just one of those creatures did to Xavier?" Jovan said. "How are we to get past 70 of them?" "I will cause them to be blind to us," Andor responded. "We'll fly up and over them, landing in front of the hut." After Andor cast the spell on him and Jovan, he said, "We'll have about 20 minutes of protection. That should be plenty of time to get inside." "Let us hope so," Jovan said, not so sure. Jovan guided the carpet to a soft landing right in front of the hut facing the door. He kept a watch behind them, just in case, while Andor approached the entrance. Andor knocked on the door with 3 heavy raps. He waited for a moment, and when there was no response, he repeated his knocking and said, "Lady of the hut, I wish to speak to you, if you will." Still nothing. "The elder sent me," Andor said with urgency in his voice. At the mention of the elder, the door to the hut opened. Andor stepped inside, the door shutting on its own, trapping Jovan outside with the skulls. The inside of the hut was partitioned with bead curtains. It was cluttered with all sorts of items one might find in a witch's home. books stacked in piles, cages with small animals here and there, candles everywhere, some lit, some not, and a huge cauldron toward the back. An old hag of a woman sat at a rough-hewn table, her back facing Andor. She wore black, ragged clothes that appeared to have once been a robe. Her long, stringy white hair fell down her bony back. She wore a necklace of bones and had a chicken leg totem hanging from her waist. Come in, she said in a cracked, granny voice. It has been some time since I had such polite visitors as to knock and be invited in. Yes, a long time indeed. Most are foolish and try to force their way in. Yes, foolish they are. Tell me, what is the name of the one that was sent by the elder? She turned her head slightly over her shoulder to catch a glimpse of her visitor. Andor. My name is Andor. He could not make out her visage, as her face was cloaked in shadows. Are you the hierarch I seek? Ah, hierarch, she said. Yes. She started to answer, then paused and said, No. The cares of the world are no longer my own. Then suddenly, and with unexpected anger, they would have had me wither away and die in that prison like some cast-off. She then calmed down and continued, My life is my own now, thanks to those meddling, inept family of wizards. Power it is they seek. They have not the capacity for such power. But now, thanks to them, I am left with the task of finding immortality, lest I fade away. She paused a long moment, then said, What did the elder tell you of me? That you have the answers that I seek. The old hag quickly stood to her feet, moving with the agility of someone in their youth. Andor could now see her face for the first time. She had a long, crooked, wart-covered nose that sat obtrusively on a face whose skin was so tight that Andor thought it might crack open at any moment. Ah, a seeker of knowledge. Excellent. Ask me what you will, but beware. You too may wither away if you know too much. Andor recited the first prophecy to her. As he did, she returned to the chair at her table, her back once again to Andor. When he was done, she said, Ah, yes, the elder was correct in sending you to me. What answers would you have? Are the three kings, King Friedrich, Prince Thomas, and the prince's son? Yes. Who is the fourth? Friedrich's son. Prince Thomas? No. No? The prince has no siblings. Ah, lot you know. He has a brother. How? His mother died in childbirth. 3 brothers, 2 mothers. 1 and 1 be dead. Now you're talking in riddles. I need no more riddles. The prophecy is enough. The king's wife died in childbirth, not the prince's mother. The prince of the covenant shall be given up to she that begat him. Who is Prince Thomas's mother? You know her as Varag. Andor was floored at this revelation. Varag was Prince Thomas's mother? How? You know her as Varag, but to King Friedrich she was the chambermaid Natasha. Through her magic she altered her appearance and seduced the king, becoming impregnated with his child. The king's wife was also carrying the king's seed. Varag had to have her child, her own blood, to become king. So using her magic and calling upon the forces of darkness, she caused the fetuses to be swapped in the wombs. The king's wife carried Varag's child, and Varag the child of the queen. You said there were 3 brothers. Unbeknownst to Varag, the queen had been carrying twins, which were now inside Varag's belly. The first to come out was stillborn. The other was taken by the midwife. What is the name of Prince Thomas's brother? His given name is Pedius. Pedius, I know that name. Through all of my communing with St. Columba and the revelations of the Pool of Time, I have not learned any of what you speak of. How is it you have knowledge of these things? She said nothing, only turning to face Andor once again. Her face was not as it was before. Her nose was no longer covered with warts, and her skin was that of a young maiden. Her hair had turned from white to gray with black streaks. Her only response to his question was a big, wicked smile. How long had Andor been in there? Jovan trusted his longtime friend, but was fearful of what he might be up against alone. He wanted to knock down the door and rescue Andor from the fate he hoped was not to be, but knew that it was probably unwise to undertake such a thing under the circumstances. While he was contemplating these things, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned to see several of the skulls approaching him, their snake-like spinal cords moving swiftly and quietly across the marsh. Their stealth detected, they stopped and began swaying back and forth in a hypnotic-like dance. Just then, the door to the hut opened and Andor emerged. "Get us out of here," he said, his voice sounding tired. The pair stepped on the carpet, and Jovan gave the command to rise. When they were safely in the air and on their way out of the swamp, Jovan turned toward Andor to speak. His words held fast in his throat as he gazed at the venerable man sitting on the carpet. Andor, through his sacrifice of life-giving spells to his friends and comrades, had aged nearly 30 years. What should have been a man nearing 40 when he entered the hut was almost 70. His brown hair still clung on, giving way to white around the ears only. What came out of the hut 20 minutes later after it went in was a stark, white-haired man of 100 plus. Chapter 86. Varag and Pantera appeared in the throne room of Ikra, the latter having received communication that his mother and another were seeking a conference and thus temporarily dispelled the magic protecting against such ingress. Ikra lounged on his throne of skulls with all the arrogance of a god with no equal. Behind him, skulking in the darkness of the unlit portion of the throne room, were three figures. Two were slender and concealed even further by the solid black cowled robes they wore. The third was of monstrous proportions, being over 7 feet tall with a bloated yet muscular build. As the pair approached the throne, Ikra could not help but notice the item Pantera carried in his left hand. The rod of iron had chains that clanked and rattled as he walked, and small red flames that flickered from the tip, all but announcing its existence in the darkened and silent halls of the throne room. "You look well, Varag," Ikra said, his eyes darting back and forth from the rod and the witch that spawned him. "I can't say the same for you," she replied, noticing a change in the fiend, as if his very essence had diminished. "Feeling a bit drained these days." "What brings you here?" he replied, totally ignoring the reference to his condition. "And who is this?" He paused, framing his next words, while his eyes took in Pantera and the rod. "Creature you have brought with you," he finally said. "Your latest conquest?" Varag was used to such derision from her wicked son, and thus brushed the comment off without a second thought. Had it come from any other, the offender would be nothing but a pile of dust on the floor within seconds of the words escaping his lips. Instead, she just continued with her reason for gracing him with her presence. "I require your armies." Chapter 87. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to the gods and to their throne. But the woman was given 2 owls with which to weaken the great dragon, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Rurik's capital lay just 50 miles south of the Badlands. While they were used to minor raids here and there, the defenders of the walled city were not prepared for the news that they received. A large invasion force was crossing the river that formed the natural border between the two lands. With the bulk of their army gone fighting the army of the dead, things were looking grim. Indeed, the city was in a heightened state of panic. Like Sandro and several of his fellow knights had stayed behind to bolster the city guard when the armies had marched north. That was a year and a half ago. Few messages had come from the armies of Rurik and Banik during that time. Those that did were at the trembling hands of messengers whose spirits were broken by the horrors they had witnessed. Calls for aid had been sent to the neighboring nations after the first year. No response had come. The western kingdoms had Ikra to contend with, while Novgorod to the east had just repelled an invasion of their own with their northern neighbors and had to keep a vigilant watch against the kingdom of the dead on their eastern border. As a matter of saying, they were ripe for the pickings. Varag and Pantera marched their army of over 50,000 humanoids east towards the unprotected flank of Rurik. Over half the force consisted of Nagabs, whose alliance Pantera secured by killing the chief of each tribe in single combat. Those few that still opposed him quickly cowered to the power of the rod he wielded. The lesser races fell in line without any trouble. They crossed the river and into Rurik without any resistance whatsoever. As they marched south towards the capital, an army of barely one-tenth its size approached. However, instead of Rurik's coat of arms, the banners blowing in the wind were blue with a golden crown. Receiving warnings of large troop movements from the Hellingsschaft, King Friedrich quickly mustered his army and transported them via the Royal Navy to the capital of Rurik, where they disembarked to the cheers of the populace and set forth to meet the invaders head-on. At the forefront of the army were several hundred knights led by the king himself and Prince Thomas. Most of these were holy knights of Hieronymus, including Eric the Good. Their polished armor gleamed in the sun as they sat astride their heavy war horses, lances upright at attention. The entire force of cavalry made up 1/5 of the army's composition of just over 4,000 troops, a far cry in numbers to that of Varag's invasion force. "A knight of Hieronymus is worth 10 orcs," was a saying among the populace in Folkreach. This was a time that needed to ring true more than ever. Andor had sent a call out to the protectors, an urgent summons. Of the 5 other members of the group, only Eric failed to respond. There hadn't been any change in Xavier's condition, but the need was too great for him to sit this out. Andor had to trust that Xavier could control whatever had a hold on him long enough for what they had to do. Andor had crafted a magical staff to hold the talisman he had used on the priestess of Ikra years ago. He now took up that staff and led the others outside, where they summoned their hippogriffs. The 5 protectors then took to the sky and headed east. The last of Varag's army were still making the river crossing when the front lines squared off with King Friedrich's force. With 1,000 yards between them, to the surprise of everyone on Rurik's side, Varag and Pantera rode to the middle and stopped. Several minutes went by before 2 riders from the Rurik side came out to meet them. King Friedrich and Prince Thomas approached cautiously, expecting treachery at any moment. They stopped when they were no more than 10 feet away. Friedrich sat upon his black warhorse, his fur-trimmed blue cloak draped across its haunch. He wore a brown and tan jerkin over a layer of chainmail, which in turn was worn over a set of full-plate armor. He wore a red cloth cap over his hooded mail, which was topped off with his bejeweled golden crown. Prince Thomas was astride his white warhorse, which was complete with plate barding covered with a solid blue caparizon. He wore full-plate armor with a red visored helmet. His blue and red shield bore the spotted owl insignia of Hieronymus. Across from them, Varag sat upon a black and white stallion draped with a purple blanket. Her raven hair hung down past the hood of her black robe. Her ruby-red lips curled in a sly smile as she focused her attention on the king. Pantera wore elaborate Gothic-styled plate armor with a winged skull design on the placard and poems. His horned helm also sported the winged skull, whose visor was currently lifted, revealing his ghastly face. A large tower shield in the design of a demon's skull hung on the side of his black warhorse, and a smaller shield bearing the horned owl image of Bruegel was strapped to his forearm. A large red cloak bearing the same image hung from his pauldrons. "Your troops bear neither the forked tongue of Ikra nor the horned devil of the Hellingshaft," King Friedrich pointed out their lack of standards. "Who dares enter this duchy unannounced and uninvited?" "I hardly think a force as large as mine can go anywhere unannounced," Varag said imperiously, "and I need not an invitation. I go when and where I please." Then quickly changing her mood to a more seductive nature, "Oh, come now, darling. Have you forgotten the chambermaid you invited to your bed? That was—" She paused, then addressed Prince Thomas. "How old are you, boy?" Without waiting for a reply, she continued, "What, 56 years ago?" She paused, saying not another word, searching his eyes for the spark of realization his memory would impart. As soon as the first flicker appeared, she continued, "You do remember me. How lovely. Don't you find it fitting that our little family should meet like this? Thomas, this is your brother Pantera," she said, averting her eyes to the prince while gesturing to Pantera, and then quickly directing her attention back to Friedrich. "I would say he's got your eyes, but as you can see, he is not himself." As an assortment of emotions ravaged father and son, off in the distance the tiny images of 5 airborne riders astride their winged mounts could be seen approaching the two armies. Chapter 88. A patrol of 10, wearing the prowling lion insignia of Novgorod, slowly approached the seemingly deserted farmstead. They had heard rumors of entire villages disappearing overnight near the border of the Kingdom of the Dead, and were scouring the countryside as a precaution. They were beginning to think the rumors to be the result of too much ale when they spotted this farm off in the distance. It was the middle of the day, yet there was no one tending to the crops. They dismounted and began walking their steeds through the 4-foot-tall wheat, their free hands on their swords ready to strike should they encounter opposition. As they drew closer to the farmhouse, they spotted several peasants meandering about. They relaxed their guard and walked out of the wheat field, hailing the nearest man. What turned to face them was no man, at least not anymore. The gray pallor to its skin identified its undead state. With crazed eyes that burned with hate, it reached for the nearest guard with its leathery hands. The guard drew his sword and slashed the creature. His weapon seemed not to faze it, as it continued toward the guard, undaunted. The creature grabbed the guard around the throat and began to squeeze, as more of its kind descended on the others from out of nowhere. None of the guard's weapons seemed to have any effect on the creatures, and in a matter of minutes the entire patrol lay dead. Now, in the absence of the living, the creatures returned to a state of aimless meandering. Off in the distance, to the east, the landscape rippled with movement as thousands upon thousands of the creatures slowly made their way toward the farmstead, led by 6 figures dressed in purple robes. And that, my friends, is where we are going to wrap up tonight's reading. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and notification bells, and make sure you share with all your friends so that they can enjoy this channel as well. And make sure that you support this channel, please. You can do so by purchasing either the hardback, paperback, or ebook format of the book that I am currently reading to you, Book of Prophecies, as I do not have a tip jar or a Patreon account. It would be greatly appreciated and would help me out immensely. So, until next time, and as always, see you soon.